Good evening and welcome to the fourth of 5 forums for candidates for office for the November 6 elections, being brought to you by Cayuga Community College and The Citizen. I'm your moderator, Guy Cosentino. On November 6th, voters across the state of New York get to vote for members of the New York State Legislature, 63 members of the Senate, as well as 150 members of the Assembly. The 51st Senate District is now represented by Jim Seward, which includes the towns of Owasco and goes along the east side of Owasco Lake, headed south towards Moravia. Freshman Senator Pam Helming represents the 54th Senate District, which includes the rest of the city and points west of the county and north. Both of those forums have occurred in the last 10 days. But Cayuga County has another senator, and that's John DeFrancisco, who currently represents the 50th Senate District that does cover parts of the city of Auburn and areas east. Earlier this year, Senator DeFrancisco decided to run for governor, and he indicated even at that time that whether he won the nomination for governor or not, he would most likely not be seeking a Senate seat for a seat that he's represented since 1992. When his bid did not go well for governor, he did decide not to seek re-election. As a result, come January, the 50th Senate District will have a new representative in the legislature, in that upper chamber, and we have both of the candidates running this year in the studio to answer questions about themselves, the issues facing the district, and the state overall. Jeremy Boyer, the executive editor of The Citizen, whose weekly column appears today on Thursdays in the editorial page of The Citizen, is with us as usual to be asking the questions. Our candidates, who are sitting in the order of their opening statements, are here. They are John Mannion, who is on the Democratic Working Families and Women's Equality Party lines, and he is being he is facing off Robert Antonacci, who's on the Republican, Conservative, Independence, and Upstate Jobs lines. Gentlemen, welcome. As we said, we did a coin toss. Mr. Mannion will get 2 minutes to give his opening statement, then Mr. Antonacci, and then we'll flip back and forth, and we'll give you the rules for going with questions right after that. So Mr. Mannion, who again is on the Democratic line, the Working Families line, and the Women's Equality Party, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having us here, and thank you for holding this forum. My name is John Mannion. I'm a lifelong Central New Yorker. I grew up on Tipperary Hill on the west side of Syracuse. I've been married for 21 years to my wife Jennifer. She's originally from the east side of Syracuse. We live in the town of Geddes, and our children attend West Hill schools, and one of them attends Lemoyne College. I've been a teacher for 25 years, a teacher of science, an advanced placement biology teacher currently at the West Genesee Central School District. A few years ago, there were some changes to public education, and because I'm married to a teacher, and I am a teacher myself and know a lot of them and have children in school, I disagreed with some of those changes, and I saw the negative impact that it had on their education. As a result, I took on a larger role as the president of the West Genesee Teachers Association. That was about 6 years ago. And in doing so, I not only went through contract negotiations and arbitrations and maintained relationships while doing all of those things, I also became a strong advocate for public education, both locally and in Albany. And as a result of that, I met a lot of great people that have the same frustrations that I do. And those frustrations have to do with the polarization of the parties and a disconnect between constituents and their elected officials. One of the things that I think is a major problem in our current state of politics is that there is more big money in politics than ever before, and I think as a result of that, there's reason to believe that there's less faith in government than ever before. I myself, never running for public office before, feel like it's a good time for someone who has not been corrupted by the system to run, and that's why I'm doing so.
Thank you, Mr. Mannion. We'll now hear from Robert Antonacci, who's on the Republican, Conservative, Independence, and he has an independent line, which is the Upstate Jobs line.
Thank you.
Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to the Community College for putting this on. Just like in Onondaga County, these are great institutions, and it's an honor to be here. John's absolutely right. There's a lot of big money and a lot of big dark money. Most of it's being aimed at me and negative ads, so I'm very happy to be able to tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Robert Antonacci. I've been the county controller in Onondaga for 11 years. I am a graduate of Lemoyne College, where I got my CPA or accounting degree, then became a certified public accountant. Went back to Syracuse University for law school, started my own practice serving in the private sector for approximately 22 years. I was also a professor at Lemoyne, so I'm very familiar with the college environment and enjoyed those 6 years up at Lemoyne College teaching business law. My wife, Michelle, is a registered nurse. I have a son, Robert III, who is a senior at Cazenovia College, and my daughter, Jacqueline, who's the president of her high school class at West Hill. John and I have a lot of similarities. I think we're both great family men, but there are sharp and distinct contrasts. I believe my experience in the private sector, coupled with my 11 years in government service, makes me the ideal person to go down to Albany and fight for Central New York. I've stood up to my own party. I've got the scars to show it, but I've stood up when I believe it is the right thing to do, and I'm not afraid to take on the tough issues. As a certified public accountant, many of the issues we're facing are financial. I believe I bring a unique ability to attack problems, to assess issues, and solve problems. And that's why I believe I am the best person to go down to Albany and represent Central New York. So again, thank you for giving us this opportunity to talk to the voters of the 50th District.
Thank you, Mr. Antonacci. As we had said at the beginning, Mr. Boyer is here to ask questions. He'll be able to ask them of you individually or both of you. If it's both, we'll switch back and forth. You'll have 2 minutes to answer the question. If you'd like a minute follow-up, just give me a high sign and we'll make sure that Suki knows that you have a minute as well. She's our timekeeper, who is a 2019, on track to be a 2019 grad here. Mr. Boyer, welcome back.
Thank you, and thanks, gentlemen, for coming over here to Auburn and spending an hour with us to answer some questions. We'll try to get through as much as we can in that time. I'd like to start, though, with sort of a bigger picture question, and that's the fact that this Senate race, a lot of people have pointed to it as one of the key races in determining which party will control the Senate in 2019. So I'd like for you to both talk about, you know, the case for your party to have that majority. Why is it important that, in Mr. Mannion's case, why is it important to have a Democratic majority? Mr. Antonacci, why is it important to have a Republican majority?
All right. Mr. Mannion, you'll have 2 minutes on this subject, then we'll go to Mr. Antonacci.
Okay, thank you. Well, I believe that it's important. First of all, let me say this. There are several races besides this race where they are very closely contested races, and the expectation would be that some of those seats that were formerly held by Republicans will be taken over by Democrats. So I believe that the Democrats will be in the majority. One reason that's important for me to be in that seat is someone in the majority can help strongly advocate to bring things back to Central New York by being in the majority. But there's some common sense legislation that has made it through the Assembly that has never hit the floor of the Senate. One of those legislations is something that's very important to me, which is public education. Many years ago, there were changes to the testing culture and testing procedures that were going through public education, and then also changes to the teacher evaluation system. There was an opportunity to correct a wrong last year. The Assembly passed a bill that would change teacher evaluations, and there were 55 co-sponsors of that bill in the Senate. So there was an overwhelming amount of support for that bill. It never hit the floor, and it never hit the floor because the Senate majority prevented it from hitting the floor. There are also some other common sense, important legislations that went through the Assembly that either were voted on by the Senate or did not get to the Senate floor, and that's why I believe it's important to have a Democratic majority and important to have me in that seat in the majority to help bring back our fair share to Central New York.
Thank you, Mr. Mannion. Mr. Antonacci?
Thank you. You know, whether you like John or me or dislike either one of us, it's about checks and balances, a basic fundamental concept in our government structure. When the Senate went to the Democrats in 2008, 2009, it was an absolute unmitigated disaster. Taxes went up $14 billion. Spending went up $14 billion. The bottom line is New York is in trouble. We are headed in the right direction. Every economic indicator has us in dead last. You pick it. Property tax tax, relation to value, economic freedoms, you name it, we're dead last. Our atmosphere for economic development and jobs is absolutely horrible. So the bottom line is we cannot afford Democratic control of the state Senate. Now, do I think that more bills should come to the floor? Absolutely. Vote your conscience, and let's get these issues out there so that they can be debated. But the bottom line is history, those who ignore history tend to repeat it. And I believe the upper house being controlled by the Democrats and New York State being controlled by one party will be a further disaster for New York State, and is not the right thing for us to take ourselves out of this economic malaise.
Mr. Mannion, you'll have 1 minute to follow up.
Thank you. As I stated before, I'm fairly confident that the Democrats are going to be in the majority in the Senate, and I've spoken with many of those senators that have served for some time. These are good people. They understand New York, all over New York. They understand the conditions that we live in, and they understand that with this movement towards a Democratic majority in the Senate comes great responsibility. And the legislation that could be advanced is going to be advanced in a very sound and prudent way. And I'm confident that some of that important legislation will make it through and will help all New Yorkers, particularly Central New Yorkers.
Thank you.
Mr. Antonacci?
If I could just add, you know, listen, I'm more than happy to work across the aisle. I disagree with John. I think the Senate Republicans are going to maintain the majority, but I also have bipartisan support. I was just endorsed yesterday by 2 Democratic county controllers, one from Albany, one from Ulster. They understand my record. They respect my record. I'll work with anybody that wants to move New York State forward, but the bottom line is I'm the guy that's going to be fighting for upstate New York, because New York City takes too much from us, and I think that we need to have the Republican control of the state Senate. It will be what's best for New York State.
Okay, Mr. Boyer?
All right, I'd start into a few issues. I'd like to start kind of local, Cayuga County local, and a big one here is water quality. Our major water source, Owasco Lake, has been inundated with harmful algal blooms for 3 summers in a row now, and we're just kind of hanging on to keep it from getting into the actual water supply. So there's been a lot of response to that, a lot of different approaches being taken, but there's still more to go, and I'd like to hear from each of you what you think New York State and what you as a senator would try to do to continue to fight that battle.
Mr. Antonacci, you'll get 2 minutes first.
Thank you very much. I have talked with the Owasco Town Supervisor. I have talked with farmers and dairy industry. I'm endorsed by the Northeast Dairy Association. And the bottom line is it's a multi-pronged problem, and it needs a multi-pronged attack. But there is no amount of money that we will not spend to save our water. Water is our #1 essential for life, other than maybe air. But we have to have clean, potable water. As a county comptroller, I have advocated for our water system because I believe it is also economic development. When you look at other parts of the country, like Nevada and Southern California, Tucson, Arizona, they are all facing water shortages. This is a way for us to bring back the economy and jobs to Central New York because of our water quality. We can't hurt the farmers. We need to look at best practices. We need to make sure that farmers can help us help water quality. Yes, we've had a couple anomalies, some major storms that have not been the usual, the usual norm. But the bottom line is we have to make sure that our water quality is bar none the best, and there will be no amount of money that I will not be willing to allocate to make sure that those problems are solved.
Okay. Mr. Mannion.
Well, we live in an area with more clean, fresh, accessible water than almost anywhere in the world. I agree with my opponent that is one of our greatest resources and is something that is a strength for us that we have to make sure we preserve. I'm a biology teacher. I've been a biology teacher for 25 years. I teach this very topic actually multiple times a year. I understand the eutrophication of lakes. I understand the impact of nitrogen and phosphorus, and I understand that that has occurred over a long period of time, and the cause of it is for a variety of reasons. I have met with people, excellent people who are, many of them volunteers, who care about their lakes, care about their clean water locally, both in Owasco and Skaneateles. Skaneateles is a low nutrient lake. We would never have expected that an algal bloom would occur in that lake, and it has occurred over the course of the last 2 years. We have a problem. We're going to continue to have a problem. There are going to be algal blooms in Owasco and Skaneateles next year. We're going to have those because of the nitrogen and the phosphorus levels that are there and because of the increasing temperatures that we face. So I commend the people of Auburn because they have placed a carbon filtration system in, and that has assured clean water for their residents. But we have to be proactive, and that proactive approach has got to come from the state. In the volunteers that I spoke with, they have frustrations because they have full-time jobs, and although they want to do everything they can to maintain this clean water, they need the funding, they need better coordination. They can't do it on their own. They need help. They do need the state to come in and assist on this. And it is our most precious resource, and we have to treat it as such.
Mr. Boyer.
One thing just to kind of follow up on that, I mean, you mentioned the carbon filtration system, and Auburn had to, and the town of Owasco had to, shout and scream and fight tooth and nail to get money to get their systems in place 2 summers ago. This year, the village of Aurora did the same thing where, they had to really rattle some cages. They got the money. But as you said, this is going on everywhere and it's going to continue. Should the state do some kind of preemptive statewide investment in carbon filtration in every water plant that's susceptible to these?
Mr. Mannion, you'll go first.
As someone who I think understands the science of this, carbon filtration is very important. But unfortunately, we have to preemptively prevent the harmful algal blooms. We can't have the expectation that 20 years from now that there will be algal blooms in all of our lakes and it will impact our drinking water, so we must have carbon filtration systems. Because beyond the drinking water, there's other problems that occur with harmful algal blooms. It's going to impact the ecosystem. It's going to impact property values. So yes, that is important, and I commend those municipalities that made sure that they could provide clean drinking water for their residents, but the plan has to involve a preemptive move to prevent the algal blooms.
Mr. Antonacci?
Yes, I agree with John. We have to, prevention, they say an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and I think that's important in the water quality as well. I know I'm concerned about the city of Syracuse, not, because they have a potential to need a 100 million plus water treatment because they take most of their water from Skaneateles. But the bottom line is our community should not have to worry about clean drinking water. It'd be a disgrace, and I will fight for every penny I can get, whether it's the federal government, state government. We will make sure that there's good, clean drinking water in our communities. And again, that's not a Democrat or Republican issue. That's a human issue, and we need clean water. So.
Okay, Mr. Boyer?
Let's talk a little bit about I-81. The person you're replacing has had some colorful opinions about I-81. But out here, a big concern for people is the impact that a potential boulevard option could have on truck traffic. So I'd like to hear from each of you where you stand on what you would like to see the ultimate decision be and how you would deal with the truck issue.
Mr. Antonacci, you'll go first.
Thank you. I have sent a letter to the editor of the Syracuse Post-Standard. I think it's on our website, and certainly we will be happy to get it to the college, our letter to the editor regarding 81. I've spoken out on the topic many times, and I've written on the topic. I believe that Route 81 is the most important civic decision that we will face in many generations. It is going to affect our economy. It is going to affect our way of life for the next 70 years, unless we get driverless cars or spaceships. But the bottom line is this is the most important issue that either John and I as senator will be facing. I have tried to strike a balance between the community grid proponents and those proponents that believe 81 should continue in the north-south direction. Knocking down 81 in favor of a community grid will affect the suburbs detrimentally. Certainly in DeWitt, which is to the the east of the city, and in the western suburbs like Skaneateles, knocking down 81 for a community grid will be a disaster to Skaneateles. Trucks will be coming up 41. It will violate their quality of life. I believe it could affect water quality, and certainly the noise during tourist season will be unmanageable. The bottom line is this: I know the tunnel will cost more money. I am not a fiscal knucklehead. I am a fiscal watchdog. But when we talk about working together as a community, putting our collective efforts together, and telling Washington and Albany that we're going to fight for an infrastructure project that makes everyone happy, the best possibility is a community grid with a tunnel hybrid. Why? Because everybody wins. We're not picking winners and losers. We're working together to make sure that traffic goes in the north-south direction, which I am first and foremost a proponent of. But if we can't come together, then we can compromise, and that's what I have been advocating all along.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Antonacci. Mr. Mannion, on the issue of what do we do with I-81?
Yes. Well, I commend Bob for making sure he got that answer in 2 minutes. That was excellent. I'll do the same. I just ate up some of my time, but
I'll yield some of mine.
I think it's very important that we make sure that the jobs are local and that the contractors that we use are local. This decision should have already been made a long time ago. We have a crumbling viaduct that needs to be repaired and is costing state money on a daily basis. So that being said, we have 3 options, but in my opinion, we really have 2. The tunnel was off of the plan. It was taken away, it was put back on, and it was taken away for a number of reasons, including costs, but the study that was done did not account for maintenance costs, did not account for the amount of infrastructure that was going to cut through, and therefore, rather than give the residents of Central New York a false sense of hope, we really are down to 2 decisions, which is, are we going to rebuild the viaduct, or are we going to place in a community grid? Rebuilding the viaduct will be enhanced. I mean, it will be an improvement on our current traffic plan, and that can be a good thing. Myself, being into this game about 8 months now, I've met with a lot of people. I've met with civil engineers and urban planners, some of them my own students who I taught many years ago, more than 2 decades ago, and I learned a lot. And what I learned is that there's some benefit, lots of benefit to potentially putting in a community grid. Some misinformation out there is that it is a complex grid and not just a boulevard, that drive times would not be impacted that much, sometimes not at all, sometimes enhanced, and that access to the hospitals and the university could be enhanced. So I use the phrase, give the grid a chance, because I believe when a decision is made, if we do get the grid, or we do get the viaduct, I'm going to be supportive of that decision and make sure that it doesn't polarize people and unites people.
All right. Just a quick follow-up. If you give the grid a chance, do you have the truck traffic concern, and what would you do with that issue if you go with the grid?
I do appreciate that follow-up because I did not get to that part of the question, or the original question, so thank you. I believe that when a decision is made, there are going to be some things that need to be mitigated, and that would include increased traffic on what is currently now 481. As far as the village of Skaneateles goes, we know that there are trucking companies or truck drivers that are already breaking the law. The law is already in place that they're not supposed to use these roads, and if I understand correctly, in the past there was increased efforts to make sure that we hold those individuals accountable. So if the grid is the decision that we come to, that's something that we have to be ahead of the game on, and we have to be sure that we uphold the current laws that are in place.
Mr. Antonacci, you'll get a minute as well.
Thank you. I just want to make sure we understand. My opponent is in favor of the grid. I have taken great risk, and I'm happy to do it because I'm a leader and I'm willing to fight for what I believe is right. I have advocated for the tunnel grid option because I think it stops us pitting each other against each other. We don't have a suburb versus city fight, and we do what's best for the overall community. If we take the chance on the community grid and it doesn't work, we're done, and it will be a disaster for Skaneateles and DeWitt. So that's why I take the position that I am, and I'm proud of that position.
Mr. Mannion, I'll give you a minute, and then Mr. Antonacci will get a follow-up if he wishes as well.
Thank you. In my investigation of this topic, one thing came through glaringly clear. And what was glaringly clear is that regardless of where many people were on this issue, the informed people that were under the age of 50, in fact, all people that were under the age of 50, none of them felt like rebuilding the viaduct was a good idea. because they see a very different world in 2028 and 2038 than we saw in 1998. They do see a transformation occurring, a lifestyle change in many ways that doesn't involve 3,200 square foot homes in the suburbs and 25-minute commutes. So as a result, I'm listening to those people, and I taught some of those people, and I trust them.
Mr. Antonacci, do you have anything you want to add?
No, again, I'm trying to build collaboration. There's definitely misinformation on both sides of this issue, but again, it's the most important issue that we're going to face, and I think the skills I bring to this job will help alleviate those potential problems, because once we make the decision, it's it.
Mr. Boyer.
All right, let's shift to education and specifically education funding, because here a large portion of this audience have people going to Auburn schools, and that Auburn School District, if you look at spending per pupil, is one of the lowest in the state. And Auburn will tell you one of the reasons they're one of the lowest in the state is their state aid is based on a formula using outdated data. So that said, if you do a wholesale change to funding formulas, you could end up taking money away from Skinny Atlas or West Genesee or some of the other districts in this Senate district. So my question for both of you is, what's your stance on what needs to happen with state public funding formulas, and how do you find that balance to make people whole?
So deja vu all over again. Didn't we do this 2 days ago?
Did we tape that so we could just insert it?
Replay it. So because the last question was a 1-minute follow-up, it's Mr. Mannion's turn on this, and then it'll be Mr. Antonacci. So
okay.
2 minutes on state education funding.
Gotcha. So this issue has already been litigated, and the courts have ruled that the funding has been unfair, and particularly unfair to small municipalities like Auburn. I do know this, that the per capita spending for Auburn students is less than the state average. And 2 years ago, not 2 years ago, I apologize for that, but some time ago, I was in Albany advocating in Assemblyman Finch's office and advocating in Senator DeFrancisco's office with the Auburn Teacher Association president at the time, Cheryl Miskell, and we addressed those concerns with those representatives. There's a number of problems that happen when schools are underfunded, and we have to make sure that the millions of dollars that are owed to Auburn come to Auburn. And I understand that there might be concern with other school districts, but the children of the Auburn School District, they've been harmed. They've been harmed because their class sizes are larger, because their staffing has been cut, and because some of their programs are no longer there. And these things occurred at a time where we have more kids with mental health needs and a variety of other issues that have to be addressed with them than ever before. So I understand that state funds are precious, but when a school district does not receive the funds that they are entitled to, and it's already been litigated in the courts, that falls on the back of local taxpayers in the form of their property taxes, and as a result, it's really like a lose-lose scenario. So we have to get it right, especially for the districts that have been harmed.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mannion. State funding of education.
I just want to say to John, I mean, he tells us that he's new to the political process. I think he's been in Albany more than I have. But I do agree with him that we need to fix the funding of schools. And certainly New York State, or New York City, gets more per capita funding than we do in upstate New York by almost $3,000. We need to change that. The funding formula itself is very complicated. As a certified public accountant, when I hear things, and I've been told this, that there are, and I might be exaggerating slightly, that there are about 7 people that understand the funding formula, there's a problem with that. So when I'm down there, I'm going to take a really good hard look at how we analyze that funding program and how we allocate resources. I'm told by the research that I've done that to fully fund the program as required by the court order would be another $3 billion to education. And again, there's no magic money tree, so we've got to be very cognizant that there's pressure on the wallet. The bottom line is we need to give school boards more autonomy. We need to let local control of school boards work. We need to stop teaching to the test. We need accountability, but we have to let teachers teach. So it's a multi-pronged attack on how we get more resources for our school, but we start with lessening unfunded mandates, and we fight for our fair share that we need to get in upstate New York.
Okay. Just a quick note, we're about a little over halfway through the 50th Senate District Forum. This is a race to succeed John DeFrancisco, who has served in that seat since 1992. In fact, he'll be our last guest besides Santa at the end of this session, but he will be here at the end of November. We have both candidates who are running for that office. We have John Mannion, who's on the Democratic Working Families and Women's Equality Party, as well as Robert Antonacci, who's on the Republican Conservative Independents, and he has an independent line, the Upstate Jobs Party. They're being asked questions by Jeremy Boyer, the executive editor of The Citizen. Mr. Boyer.
All right, well, let's shift to Albany's corruption. We're actually on a hot streak. It's been like 2 weeks since we've had an indictment, so...
but sentencing yesterday.
Yeah. True, true. But in any case, there's a whole laundry list of proposals out there of things that we could do to help combat this problem. We've heard people pitch term limits. We've heard limitations on outside income, changing campaign finance rules. So what I'd like you two to do is tell me what your top 1 or 2 priorities would be. What, you know, if you can't get them all done, what really is the most important that you think needs to get done?
Mr. Antonacci, you'll go first.
Thank you. And if I can help out John too, with his permission, I think we're on the same page on a lot of these issues. So hopefully we can get through this quick because there's a lot. But as Jeremy asked, I think the number one thing when we talk about ethics reform and stopping the corruption in Albany is term limits. And I know that some will say, well, you're disenfranchising the voter, you know, and having choice. But the bottom line is the politicians in the modern era have built up these juggernauts between money and support and volunteers and staff. And sometimes, a lot of times, it's very difficult for a challenger to come in and challenge an entrenched incumbent. So I think, you know, many of these entrenched incumbents forget where they came from. You know, they say power corrupts and absolute, I'm sorry, power corrupts and absolute, I got the saying screwed up, but power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely, I believe is the saying. But the bottom line is this: we need term limits to fight back and give new people a chance to come into the political process. Back in 2017, Mayor Walsh brought a lot of excitement because we knew we were going to have a new mayor. So I think that's the number one thing. We can talk about campaign finance reform, something that I believe in and something that I did in 2014 when I ran for state controller, because I believe that would target corruption by taking the big money out of politics. So I think those two things are the beginning of how we combat corruption. Close the LLC loophole is another one. Prevent the governor and executives from putting appointments on boards of ethics. You know, the bottom line is it's about character and it's about conflict. And we've got to send good people down to Albany that go down there with good character, free of conflict, and do the job that they're sent there to do.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Antonacci. Mr. Mannion.
Thank you. So I've released a 5-point plan, and that has to do with ethics reform that I believe is absolutely essential to try to restore faith in government. I agree with my opponent, Mr. Antonacci, in that term limits are important. I set the number at 14 years. It happens to be the same amount as a state Supreme Court judge, which allows somebody to do a lot of good, but doesn't necessarily make it a career out of it. And the democratic process would still occur every 2 years. I also agree that we need to get big money out of politics. We got to make sure that our elected officials are voting for our constituents and not for our donors. And unfortunately, we've seen some evidence of that occurring. Some other parts of that ethics plan includes a ban on outside income for our elected officials to make sure, as I just said, that they are beholden to their constituents and no one else. We've had major projects, publicly funded projects or publicly assisted projects that are out there where we end up with developers or elected officials getting indicted and being sent to prison because of bribery, corruption, bid rigging charges. That's part of the reason why we have a lack of faith in government, and that absolutely has to change. So I would like to see greater oversight from the comptroller's office, who could head a truly independent commission to make sure that those tax dollars are spent wisely, prudently, and when projects don't pan out, that the developers are held accountable. I believe my last point, if I have my points correct, is that we need a truly independent process when it comes to redistricting. The 50th and the 53rd Senate district should not look like they do, and that's why I am a proponent of a truly independent process for that.
I can be very quick. I support John's last 3 points. I believe that outside income, if it's banned, it will create a different type of legislator. I think the devil's in the details. But again, it's about conflict. I certainly agree with him on redistricting. It's a disgrace, the shape of this district. So, and also with the, I mean, and I'm sure Tom DiNapoli would be happy to hear that both of us agree with more oversight for the Comptroller's office.
Yes,
So.
I'm good.
All right.
Yes, thank you.
Mr. Boyer.
All right, well, we'll move on to a few subjects that have kind of divided along party lines in Albany, and even some one-house bills. The first one is the Child Victims Act, the legislation that would expand the statute of limitations on child sex abuse crimes, and also allow for a 1 year, they call it the 1 year look back, but give people who have been abused an opportunity to also bring forward civil complaints. So where do you stand on that legislation, and explain why?
Mr. Mannion, you'll have 2 minutes on this subject.
So one of the first constituent groups that I reached out to when I had announced that I was running was an organization called Protect New York Kids, which is headed by Gary Greenberg. We've been in conversations multiple times over the course of 8 months, and I'm endorsed by that organization. So I'm definitely supportive of that legislation. Myself, as a teacher of children that have been sexually abused, it would take a great amount of courage for a young person or a young adult to come forward and talk about that abuse, and because sometimes institutions or individuals, it's very difficult to get through there because sometimes they're not believed, and there can be an incredible stigma with that. So I do support the Child Victims Act, and I have for a long time. Mr. Greenberg came up, we held a press conference together, we had a great conversation again where he formally announced his endorsement. This is a bill that has made it through the Assembly and should already be through the Senate. And 90% of citizens of the state of New York support this bill. It never hit the floor in the Senate. And my opponent, Mr. Antonacci, has stated that he is supportive of that Child Victims Act. And I would say that the Republican Senate, the year's not over. If they want to come back and they want to get this bill pushed through and provide some peace for some individuals that went through horrific events, then there may be some restitution and some peace for those people, and we still have time to get this bill through in this cycle.
Thank you. Comptroller, you'll have 2 minutes.
Thank you. I'm a former board member of the Vera House, just a wonderful organization. Very proud of my time on that board and my service to that community. Bottom line is I agree with my opponent on this. It's something that should be voted on. You know, and I'm not going to sit here as a lawyer and try to talk about, there are some risk with a 1 year opening of a statute of limitations. But the bottom line is we're not going to make our children that have suffered these kinds of consequences political footballs. I think this is an area where it's not a Republican Democrat issue. Bottom line is put it to the vote, and let's see where we go from there.
Okay, Mr. Boyer.
Well, I mean, just to follow up on that, because this kind of comes back to the original question about control of the conference, I guess. What would you do, Mr. Antonacci, if this is your position? What would you do?
Well, I will advocate to
try
leadership.
to get this, to try to get your leaders to bring this to the floor.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I'll advocate to leadership that this is something that needs to be done. You know, I can't guarantee that there's not going to be some pushback or some attempt to recognize some of the risk with opening up a statute of limitations. I believe there's been research done. When I talked to Randy Bregman from Vera House, she did talk to me about other states that have opened up the statute of limitations, and those concerns that some haven't really materialized. And the bottom line is this is a painful thing that young people have been subjected to, and the bottom line is there needs to be some measure of support on this issue. Also, I believe Kathy Young had a proposal in some of the legislation, which I believe Gary Greenberg at one point agreed to or thought was worthy, and so he's shifted his views a little bit. So there's room for people to talk about these issues that would involve financial compensation, and I think that's also a key component to this issue.
I know that was for Mr. Antonacci. Mr. Mannion, do you have anything to add to that?
I would, yes.
You'll have 1 minute as well.
Knowing Mr. Greenberg and having a conversation with him and knowing how open he is about what had occurred to him, I think he would be okay with me sharing this story, is that at a relatively young age he went through a horrific event, and years later after he had passed the age of 23, he had seen this individual on TV that was his abuser. And there was no criminal or civil process for him to go through to make sure that this person was put away. And as a result, years went by, decades went by, and this individual abused more than 100 other children. If I'm in the Democratic Senate, and it is in the majority, I can assure you that the bill will come to the floor and the bill will be passed. I will advance the bill and co-sponsor it.
Okay. Mr. Boyer.
All right. Another one is, well, I don't know if this has actually been a one-house bill yet, but recreational marijuana use is certainly gaining more attention and interest, and some states have done it, so New York may be coming up, and where do you stand on that?
And since that was a follow-up on the last one with the conferences, Mr. Antonacci, you're up first on 2 minutes on recreational marijuana.
You know, opiate abuse is a scourge on our society, and I'm not an expert in addiction, but I'm certainly willing to listen to those experts and allocate resources to prevent opiate abuse and heroin abuse. My sister-in-law lost her son a couple of years back to heroin overdose. To her credit, she actually put into the obituary that that he died of a heroin overdose for education and let people know what happened so we could talk about these tough issues. You know, I'm told, and again, this might be rhetoric, and we have to, as senators, we're going to have to really digest and process both sides of an issue. And when you hear that, you know, recreational marijuana is a gateway drug, I need more information on that. I would say, as of today, I am not leaning towards legalization of recreational marijuana. I have a young niece that is in Colorado, and I also recently bought something online from a gentleman by the name of Arnold in Pueblo, Colorado, and I talked to him about the legalization in Colorado, and the results were mixed, and certainly Arnold believed it was a disaster. Yet I know that around us, states are making recreational marijuana legal. I'm certainly willing to listen to both sides of the story, but as of today, I would be leaning towards no.
Just for clarification purposes, and I don't do this very often, you did not buy recreational marijuana
In Colorado. I did not.
Okay, this comes up occasionally where we don't have people clarify.
But I would say that I have also would you know well, yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm not sure we're
I did
allowed
not buy
to
any
do
marijuana.
that yet.
No.
Okay,
I don't think we can call up Colorado yet and do that, but
so somebody doesn't miss.
No.
It was actually a baseball part, but
Okay, well, we've had a lot of parsing, not in your campaign,
No.
but as you know, in one of the other campaigns, there's been a lot of taking out of context.
Yep.
I apologize
Thank
for
you.
the interruption.
I appreciate that.
Mr. Mann, you will get 2 minutes on recreation to discuss
Thank you.
recreational
Yes.
marijuana.
Right. So I'm not a marijuana user. I have absolutely no plans to use marijuana. That being said, I don't believe, there's lots of evidence to suggest that the use of marijuana is prevalent and the access to marijuana is easy. Anyone that wants marijuana can get it, and they don't have to travel to Canada or Vermont where the drug is legal. They can get it on the black market, and since they're getting it on the black market, it's definitely unsafe, it's unregulated, it's untaxed, and I am surprised that I'm saying this in some ways because I think 10 years ago I wouldn't have said it. But being an area that has so much to offer from an agricultural sense, and knowing that Canada and Vermont, the substance is already legal, do I have some social concerns about it and some health concerns? I do. But that being said, the use of it is already so prevalent that I believe that people are going to go buy marijuana legally, and they don't have to travel very far. We probably live farther here in central New York to go get that than almost anywhere in the state, and more states are going to legalize this. So I think it is the right time for a number of reasons. I think it's the right time because it needs to be regulated. It would be a tax revenue. It would be a potential boon for local farmers, and it's already being used. It's already prevalent. We need to get it off the black market, I believe, at this point.
Okay, Mr. Boyer.
okay. In healthcare, there's been discussion of whether, you know, as the federal government continues to fight, the battles are being fought on that level, there's been discussion whether New York State should move forward and create its own single-payer system. The New York Health Act is a piece of legislation that would attempt to do that. So I'm asking for both of you where you stand on that, the New York Health Act.
Mr. Mannion.
So I sit on a benefits committee, and I'm fortunate enough to work in a place that has excellent affordable coverage, health coverage. And I very rarely have to make any healthcare decisions for myself or my children based on how much I'm going to pay for that coverage. But in representing 400 members, I've seen some people who have had major health issues, who have fallen off their insurance because they could not work, and as a result, they're financially strapped as a result of this. I've spoken with individuals recently as I go door to door, and I hear the same concerns, and I think those concerns come from that we had some good things in the Affordable Care Act that people liked, and then when we had this new tax bill that went through, there were changes to the Affordable Care Act, and what we're seeing now is that the plans that are out there are more costly and the coverage is worse. I talk to people who are paying $20,000 in premiums and they have $11,000 deductibles. This is a tremendous expense to individuals, and it's also a tremendous expense to small business owners, which is the area where we're growing economically. In talking to them, I have two quick stories. One is that a local small business owner that actually functions in the media had his health insurance premiums go up by 22%, and that impacted staffing. It impacted the ability for to buy new equipment, and wages stayed stagnant, and other benefits were cut. As a result, I'm not going to give you the other example. I think that example is good enough, but I would say it is a time to look at the New York Health Act and this system as a possible change, because the system is breaking, it's going to break, and we can fix it now or we can fix it later.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Mannion. Mr. Antonacci on the Single-Payer Health Act.
Yes, thank you. John's absolutely right. He's got great health insurance, and there is problems in the health insurance industry. But I think we need a scalpel, not a full wholesale change in government-run health care. Bottom line is this: we've got 20 million residents in the state of New York. Approximately 19 million of those residents are covered by some form of health insurance. I also want to make sure everybody understands we are a great society. If someone is ill and can't afford care, we will take care of them. We will brush them to the hospital. We will get them back healthy. 6 million of our residents are on Medicaid. So we do take care of our less fortunate. Bottom line is this: businesses are hurting, health insurance needs to be fixed, but some of it is self-inflicted by government. The fees and the taxes that are built into health insurance cost, health insurance policies are ridiculous. And the worst part is we can't disclose those. The health providers are prohibited from disclosing the cost of those policies that include taxes and fees, much like utilities are prohibited from letting consumers know how much of their utility bill is taxes and fees. We have to be more transparent. We have to get out of the way and let the marketplace work so that insurance premiums and insurance costs can come down. We have to foster competition. There's a lot of things that we can do without a wholesale government takeover of healthcare. Think about this: New York State running healthcare with a prohibition that there's only one source of medical insurance. It will be a disaster. Taxes, even by the liberals that have advanced this proposal, would quadruple. Taxes would quadruple, and the New York State budget would more than double, and that's the conservative figures. If you want to look at some other think tanks, we're talking about the New York State budget potentially tripling. This is unaffordable, and it's not necessary. We can make positive reforms, and again, as a CPA and an auditor that understands how to delve into a government or into these types of programs, I will bring my expertise to help lower the cost of health insurance.
Thank you, Mr. Antonacci. Mr. Mannion, you'll have 1 minute.
The United States of America is basically the only civilized nation that does not provide health care for all of its citizens. And I think what we're seeing now is that the competition model is not working. And the reason it's not working is because of the big pharmaceutical companies and the large insurance companies. In 1973, CEOs had an average salary of 30 times more than their average employee. And we were horrified at that. Here we sit in 2018, and that number is up to 400 times more. People are profiting off of healthcare while people are being denied healthcare. It's another example of the ultra-rich benefiting off of the citizens of this state and this country.
Mr. Boyer, you have another question.
All right. Let's talk quickly, if we could, about economic development and the state's model of the last, I guess it's been eight years now, or 7 or 8 years with Governor Cuomo and the regional economic development councils, where we have 10 councils. They come together, make plans. The state picks which ones get the most money. Everyone gets some, but some get more than others. And how do you think that is working, and what changes, if any, would you like to see made to that?
Mr. Antonacci, I think you're first on this.
Thank you. So the REDC, R-E-D-C, Regional Economic Development Councils, is not a bad concept. What I believe has to happen is the state legislature has to take more control and keep more accountability on these economic development programs. We all know they've been a disaster. As county controller, I have audited economic development initiatives and programs, but I've also been refused by leaders to audit certain economic development programs like those run by industrial development agencies. I have spoken out against industrial development agencies misusing tax breaks, what they call the anti-piracy statute, where we're simply moving jobs from one end of the county to another end of the county. I have seen the disastrous effect of giving tax breaks to, say, hotels, where we've got so many hotels now with tax breaks, some of them, and we've actually flattened out room occupancy tax revenue. So I am very interested in economic development. As a CPA, I've done thousands of tax returns in my private sector career, and I've counseled businesses. I understand what it takes to create and retain jobs, but the bottom line is what we've done in New York State has been a disaster. Here's what we need to do, human nature. You bring the jobs to New York State. One thing we will pay our bills. We still got some money left. You bring those jobs, you bring those promises, and then we'll reimburse you for the tax breaks that we promised. Right now, we give the tax breaks, we give the money up front, and the promises are not kept. So we need more oversight from the legislature. The REDC program's not bad, but I think we need to tweak it.
Mr. Mannion, economic development?
Well, I did release, this is not the only element of economic development, but I did release a 5-point jobs plan to help assure the success of Central New York and help some of these small businesses and tying local young people to some careers. That being said, I would say that there needs to be greater oversight. As I said before, the Hunger Games process that occurred with some of these projects, they did not work. They didn't work because the process was flawed. And we have to correct that, and I have a plan to correct it. I would agree that we've seen some successes here, and we've seen some failures. And I think some of those failures could have been corrected by reforming the process when it comes to these agencies. So I'm not for eliminating them, but I do think they have to be looked at carefully and make sure that the process is a prudent one, and that the selection is thorough and analyzed, and we just don't throw money and hope that the jobs are going to come, and that those developers are held accountable when the jobs don't.
All right, Mr. Boyer, last question.
Okay, well, I'll end with this one, and it probably, it's got to be a short answer, unfortunately, but or maybe
no, you will have 2 minutes.
Good. Well, the Postal Service is going to say thank you to both of you, because the mailboxes have been getting stuffed every day. And I know obviously you'd probably take issues with a lot of the different mailers that have been put out, some by the campaigns and some by outside groups. But I'd like you to zero in on one for each of you to tell me which you thought was most dishonest and or disturbing, and what you would like to say to set the record straight.
And just a clarification, this is for both, and is it about mailers they've sent out or mailers that sent out?
Any mailer that's been put out, and just, your chance to set the record straight on at least one of them.
Mr. Mannion, you get 2 minutes.
Okay, well, this is an important seat, and as a result of it being an important seat, as we discussed before, my opponent has a lot of support, and I have a lot of support. And some of these mailers there's control over, and some there is not. And if I'm elected, I know I'm going to have to work with Mr. Antonacci, and if he's elected, he knows that I'll be one of his constituents. That being said, one of the mailers that came out has me in a picture with Bill de Blasio. I've never met Bill de Blasio. I've never been in the same room as Bill de Blasio. And although, you know, I can be called, I guess I would say, a pawn to New York City, or I'm too liberal, or I'm going to follow New York values and not Central New York values, I think the fact that someone could attempt that level of deception is embarrassing.
Mr. Antonacci, your favorite mailer?
Yeah, well, I agree with John. That mailer was ridiculous to put it in Photoshop. I apologize to Ian. I think he's a lot better looking than Bill de Blasio, and it's just silly stuff, right? And then John's campaign, or people that support John, got caught in a negative mailer against me where they totally misconstrued my words. So that would be the one that I would point to, where words were put into my mouth that I had never spoke. Listen, that's a tough issue, abortion, but I think I'm a kind person. I think I try to understand both sides of the issue, and to try to paint me as some evil, diabolical guy is ridiculous. That being said, there's a lot of dark money in this race. My opponent has spoken out, as so have I, on trying to take the big money out of politics. That's why I believe in taxpayer campaign finance reform, where we're judged by the money we spend, that we're allocated so we can get our message out instead of having these big groups coming in and bashing people. I'm an 11-year public servant, and I'm going to probably have $700,000 spent against me bashing my 11-year record. I'm a big boy, I can take it, but there's a lot of lies in those things, and it's tough for anybody to compete with those kind of outside dollars. But that's my answer on the mailer.
Okay. We'll now go to closing statements. Mr. Boyer, thank you, first of all, for your thoughtful questions. We're going to hear from both candidates. They are sitting in the order of a draw. Mr. Antonacci, who is on the Republican, Conservative, Independent, and Upstate Jobs line. So you'll have 2 minutes to close out.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you to everybody for putting this debate together. John, thank you for a great campaign. I believe this might be our last time together. We've spent probably 6 or 7 face-to-faces, and John's always been a gentleman. And its bottom line is this: John's got a great family. Our kids go to school together. Only one of us can go down. We're both passionate about what we think we can do down in Albany. I believe the Republicans are going to be in the majority. I believe we need checks and balances in Albany, and I believe, more importantly, that my record as county controller, coupled with my private sector experience, is what is going to be needed in Albany to change the direction of New York State. Our state is not headed in the right direction. We are the highest tax state. We've got the worst outlook for economic development. Jobs are leaving. I've got people coming up to me in grocery stores saying, my kids can't find jobs. They're leaving the area. What do we do? Bottom line is, it's all hands on deck. We've got a lot of issues that we need to fix in this community: education, crime, water, you name it. I think it's the skill set that I bring, certified public accountant, public official, that will best serve us in Albany. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Antonacci. We'll now hear from his opponent, John Mannion, who's on the Democratic Working Families Party and the Women's Equality Party.
Yes.
Mr. Mannion.
I'd like to thank everyone for doing this. I'd like to thank you for hosting, and I'd like to thank Bob for this campaign. As Bob had stated, our daughters are in class together, and I think in person we have a good relationship. I think the U.S. Postal Service is probably our worst method of contact with each other. That being said, I'm just going to give you a little quick bio to wrap, which is my family got here because my grandfather came over, and he had a job building luxury automobiles in Syracuse, New York. The Great Depression hit. Unfortunately, he passed away shortly after that. My father had to work at a very young age and dropped out of school at 17. He worked for the railroad, and he worked there for 42.5 years, New York Central to Penn Central to Conrail. He absolutely loved working there. He went to work every day with a smile on his face and came home with one. It was a simple-ish life for us, but we were embedded in our community, and we were provided for. After my father had retired, I came home from college one time, and he was a little bit different. And I said, "Is something going on?" And he said, "Yeah, my pension was cut." So the Gramm-Rudman Act was passed, and as a result, he lost a part of his pension. And he was not a bitter man, but that stayed with him for a very long time, and it stayed with me. It actually contributed to, I think, where I am here today. So I feel like we're living in a time of broken promises, like that broken promise that was made to my father many years ago. And those promises that are being broken impact our environment, our dignity, our taxation, and as a result, I feel like it's a good time for people who have not been in office, who come from a variety of different backgrounds and have the skills to do this job, to take their seat at the legislative table, and that's why I ask for your vote.
Thank you, Mr. Mannion. Thank you, both of you, for not only being here at the college for this forum, but also for putting yourselves out there. Not always an easy job, as the males will tell you. But we wish you luck in the last 2 weeks. And as we said before we started the show, whoever wins this race is always welcome in this studio to talk to the voters of the district. We do want to again thank Mr. Boyer for his time today. He and I will be back on Tuesday with the candidates for the 126th Assembly District. That is the race that faces off incumbent Gary D. Finch and a Republican, and his challenger, County Legislator Keith Batman, who's a Democrat. You can see these forums and all of the shows that we've done for this election on the Citizens website at auburnpub.com. We also have these forums online today. They're done on YouTube, and you can go to Cayuga Media for those as well. After Tuesday, we're going to take a break for a week. We'll return to our regular programming in November. Among the guests that we plan to have with you is an exit interview with Senator John DeFrancisco. Outgoing Sheriff David Gould will also be here. We'll have a discussion about the changes with Hospice of the Finger Lakes, as well as a city update from City Manager Jeff Dygert. We hope to bring you Cayuga County Legislative Chairman Pat Mahunick, and then have an update on what is going on with the referendum at the Auburn Enlarged School District with Jeff Perazzola, the Auburn Superintendent of Schools. Until Tuesday, I'm Guy Cosentino for Cayuga Community College and the Citizen. I want to thank you for watching. We hope you have a great weekend, and we will see you back here for the forum for the 126th Assembly District.